Hi, AP Euro students. Today we're going to be talking about the politics of the Italian city-states. So during the Renaissance, Italy was divided into about 24 autonomous city-states. We're going to talk about 5 specific ones. So remember that Italy was not unified like we think of it today. So if you were from a particular area, like from Venice, you would refer to yourself as Venetian. Okay, you would not refer to yourself as Italian. So here are 5 main city-states that we're going to be talking about. So remember, each city-state had their own government. Some were ruled by despots, like which the rulers could have been essentially had absolute power, and sometimes were cruel. And then we had some that were ruled by republics, meaning that the power was given to the people. So an example would be Milan was ruled by a despot, which was ruled by this Visconti family. The wealth of the city-states allowed for prominent families to support artists, scientists, and philosophers. Okay, so the Kingdom of Naples. So we have the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, essentially. You can see here on the map, right? This is the region of Sicily, and this is Sicily today, and then the bottom part is the Kingdom of Naples. So it covered about 40% of what we refer to as the boot. See how like the heel looks here and the toe, and then also including Sicily. Only hereditary monarch of Italy. And basically it was in shambles until about Alfonso I took over, Alfonso I of Aragon. Remember, Spain at the time was not unified. It was split into Aragon and Castile. And basically he took control around 1443. And so the second one, the Papal States, was created by the donation of Pepin in 1756. So the kingdom, the northern part, north of the Kingdom of Naples. So remember, the Naples is in the boot, and we have the Papal States here, which included the largely independent states of these regions here, including Rome. So these were under the control of the Pope, but without, for example, without in his absence, we would have the local nobles that would take over and essentially would eventually gain power. So we also have a lot of patron of the arts come out of the Papal States. And when we say church, remember we refer to during this time period as the Catholic Church. Okay, so under Milan, we have, this is, that means it was controlled by the Duke. So north of Florence, it was landlocked, okay, meaning surrounded by other areas, regions rather than rivers or seas, and it was ruled by the Visconti family, like I mentioned earlier. It was very warlike. They're essentially like the gatekeepers of the Italian security against aggressions of the North, in particular of the Holy Roman Empire city-states, which would have been higher up on the map here. So Milan really protected the entrance leading into the Italian city-states, which will be important to note when we talk about the Italian wars later on. Milan was also famous for its metalwork, including suits of armor, and a small percentage of the people could vote. Okay. So Florence, we have, was basically kind of the epicenter of the Renaissance. When we talk about the Italian Renaissance, one of Europe's wealthiest cities because of trade. Okay, so Florence right here, Republic of Florence, inland, but it was annexed Pisa with access to the Arno River. It was ruled by the Medici family and known for its textile production as well as the banking center. So we also had our powerful guilds and merchants here. And so remember, the Medici family heavily had their hand in the banking center. Okay, so pre-plague, it was the wealthiest city-states. Before the plague as well. And then here's what I was mentioning with banking. So the bankers of Florence were amongst the richest and most powerful in the world. They were supported by the papacy in its long battle with the Holy Roman Empire. The banks were pan-European, meaning they worked with all of Europe and financed mercantile and industrial affairs, okay, leading back to the Medici family. They also had wool manufacturing, which was a major industry of the city-state, including banking. So it employed around 30,000 people, was hugely successful, and supplied clothes to most of Europe and brought great wealth to Florence. All right, so Florence post-plague was hit the hardest, one of the hardest hit places in Europe. In 1348, for example, 40% of the population died in Florence alone. A lot of the major banking firms that we had just mentioned pre-plague were closed, and then by 1380, cloth production had dropped to 25% of what it had been before the plague hit Florence. A war with Milan caused the city to go bankrupt in the early 15th century. So really this opened up for the chance for the Medici family to kind of take control. So in 1434, because of a bankrupt Florence, leaning towards the Medici family who had money, started lending out money, that's creating their banking system. Okay, so this is Cosimo de' Medici, and this is Lorenzo de' Medici, which we had talked about previously last week, kind of the two major heads of the Medici family. So remember, we also have our guilds that we'll be talking about. Guilds consisted of merchants or skilled workers and became very powerful. And some city-states, you had to be a member of a guild in order to run for public office. So you read about a little bit about the Medicis in your web quest that you did the previous week. So Cosimo was considered the elder of the Medici family, was not only a banker but a politician. He was the first member of the Medici family who essentially ruled Florence during the Italian Renaissance. And then we'll see Venice come in. So remember, Venice is here, which is very in proximity close to the Ottoman Empire. But before it was the Ottoman Empire, remember they traded with the Byzantine Empire prior to Constantinople falling to the Ottomans. It was very rich because of trade, proximity being key here. Situated along the Adriatic Sea, access to the east and to the west, it was a great maritime power. Okay. They're powerful through their trade and imported things like spices and silks, famous for its artistic glassware. And when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, Venice's trade actually suffered. Sorry. So key to Venetian trade was its privileged position and connection to the Byzantine Empire, like I just said. And their spice trade was, while lucrative, it was subsidized and basically meaning controlled by the government. This was to prevent a monopoly by limiting the number of spice voyages. They didn't want any particular merchant becoming too powerful and controlling all of the spice trade. So Venice was actually an oligarchy, meaning a small elite group controlled Venice. At the head of the government was the Doge, which is a lifetime position. And then under there, we have the Great Council, which made up of a wealthy aristocracy. Basically, this means like a chief magistrate or head of. And then we also have a Senate that had 250 members, which was chosen annually from the Great Council by a secret ballot. So you can see lots of different forms of government. established throughout the different powerful city-states. So we have two major trends on the Italian Peninsula. So consolidation of strong central government, depending on the type of government they had, the development of modern diplomacy. So all city-states did have ambassadors in order to enhance communication between the city-states, provide leaders with accurate information, and served as an offensive and defensive weapon in order to avert war between the different city-states. So when we have the fall of Constantinople, right here, which is present-day Istanbul in Turkey, in 1453, the Christian city of Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, then becoming a Muslim city. So it was the headquarters of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and then it was moved to Moscow. So remember, prior to the Renaissance, we had the split between the Roman Empire, when the western part of the Roman Empire fell and the eastern part of the Roman Empire grew and in strength, eventually becoming the Byzantine Empire. There was issues among the church and who should rule, and so there was the splitting of the Catholic Church and the creation of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Various reasons for who would be the head of the church, as well as iconoclasts, so worshiping of idols, things like that. And so we had scholars when Constantinople fell, remember being a Christian city and then becoming a Muslim city, a lot of the scholars fled. There was a lot of actually Greeks in the area because Constantinople was an ancient Greek city. So this led to an influx of Eastern texts and knowledge and the revitalization of classics being brought back to Europe. And so we had trading connections and deals with the Byzantine Empire started to disintegrated, which was especially problematic for Venice. Remember Venice being located furthest east and closest connection to Constantinople. So as a result, this pricing for spices skyrocketed. It was harder to get now. So Italians desired to find a different route in order to get to Asia and India, no longer trying to go through Constantinople. So the Ottomans became a formidable force, which would cause issues in Eastern Europe, and then eventually coming down and controlling parts of Northern Africa, and then eventually into Spain. They would continue to push westward, laying siege to Vienna and invading Italy in parts. The invasion of Italy was basically stopped by the Kingdom of Naples, and it resulted in the Peace of Lodi, stopping the Muslims from coming further. So in 1454, an Italian city-state alliance that led to 40 years of peace on the peninsula created two things. So balanced alliances between Florence and Milan, Venice and Naples. The Papal States were a balancing state, which they allied with the weaker side when it came to war. We had a pledge of non-aggression towards each other, not the weaker states, which were promptly began to conquer. So they started taking out some of the weaker city-states, which worked until about 1494. So this peacetime of negotiations worked for about 40 years. So it's leading to the powder keg. So while the Peace of Lodi maintained peace on the peninsula for 40 years, the arms races between the city-states ensued, which kind of leading into our Italian wars. The big five city-states that we just went over were Pisa amassed power and took over the weaker city-states. In 1494, everything changes and we start to have this explosion of the powder keg explodes, meaning like a dangerous situation is what a powder keg means, or a volatile situation. So then we have the beginning of the Italian Wars. which we will pick up next week. So remember, up until the Italian Wars leading this, we have most people in the large city-states that start taking over these smaller ones were craftsmen and merchants, and the growing class. And during the Peace of Lodi that was signed in 1454, Milan and Naples and Florence signed for peace in order to establish boundaries that they were all content with. In Florence in particular, we had a growing middle class and an upper class of merchants and bankers. They started to accumulate wealth where let people experience the finer things in life. So we'll start to see a shift in what happens with the different Italian city-states when the Peace of Lodi ends and we start to have this aggression during the Italian Wars, which we will pick up, like I said, again next week.